So my job is really to get you to take a step back from your day-to-day, from what you're working on right now, what you're thinking about tomorrow or the week after, or even the next year, and really think about what's going to shape our world over the next 5 to 15 years. What's going to shape the environment in which we are driving legal practice inside our organisations or as professionals serving organisations out there. I'm going to draw on two different things. So last year we published a study with ILTA, the International Legal Technology Association, looking at where technology might be going over the next 10 to 20 years. But the second is this book called The Future of Business. We're futurists, we love talking about the future. We decided we wanted to do a book about the future, but we also knew that if we tried to write our own, we'd want it to be perfect and we'd be semi-pregnant for about 3 years. We'd never get it to market. So we said we wanted to bring together a whole bunch of future thinkers and to get them to write a chapter each seemed a lot less painful. We were wrong about that. But we also said we wanted to do 20 chapters and we wanted to do it really quickly. We wanted to bring this idea of exponential thinking that we're seeing in all these other industries and say, how do you do something in a quarter of the time that you'd normally take? The publishing industry told us it would take 18 months to 2 years to do a book with 20 contributors. So we said, well, let's try and get it out. This was the beginning of February. Let's try and get it out in June. Let's just see if we can do it and treat the whole thing as a learning experiment. There are no mistakes. So the e-version of the book came out last week and the print version comes out on the 23rd. But we ended up with 62 contributors from 21 different countries around the world, 60 chapters. And it's a real kind of tour of what's shaping the business horizon over the next 10 to 20 years. So I'm going to draw extensively on both of those in what I talk about. And where do we start? I think if we look at what's going on in the world right now, we're seeing this clash between two civilizations, almost two planets. On the one hand, there are those of us who were born physical. We live in quite a conceptual world. We do law, we do accountancy, we build houses, we make cars. We see the world in very tangible terms. Everything is rather analog in terms of how we address it. We make improvements. If we can get a 10 or 20% gain on something in a year, that's fantastic. We solve things pretty much from within a kind of mindset that we've grown up in our training. But we're now clashing with a world of people who are born digital. They think digital. They don't see legal contracts. They don't see books of account. They don't see houses. They don't see cars. They don't see people. All they see is data. And they see that everything that we used to think could only be resolved by brain power alone as something that can now be tackled by finding the right algorithms. Anything that can't be rewritten for a computer program, therefore, is wrong. And they see everything as something that can be digitized and attacked in a totally different way. They also don't see that we need to limit ourselves to incremental improvement. They've grown up in a world where they've been inspired by Moore's law, which says that computer power doubles about every 18 to 24 months. So they're saying, why can't we bring that thinking to any kind of industry, whether it's production, construction, whatever? How do we bring that kind of dramatic improvement to anything? And they don't see any boundaries. So when Facebook starts to talk about being a bank, they're not being silly. What they're saying is the average bank maybe talks to their customers once a month. Facebook talks to its customers multiple times a day, or it's listening to them. It knows about my behavior, it knows about my activities, it knows about my travel, it knows about my network, it knows what I like, it knows what I don't like. So not only can it manage my money, but it can take my air miles, it can take my network, it can take my relationships, it can monetize literally everything I do, and it can create a wholly different kind of bank. And it can do that for 1.5 billion people. It's bringing a totally different mindset. And this is what we're seeing now. That's why Google's running airports, they're making cars, they've got the most popular operating system in the world for mobile phones, they've got a company now that will extend your life expectancy by 30 to 50 years if they're successful. They see no boundaries because for them it's all about bringing data, exponential thinking and the right technology to bear to solve any challenge. And that's the world we're having to play in. That's the world we're having to make sense of. For most of us in the born physical world, we saw technology as an enabler. Well, it started off as a cost center and something that gradually we had to spend more money on, but none of us sees ourselves as being a digital business that happens to do law or that happens to make cars. And that's the big difference now. These people see themselves as digital businesses and they happen to be in a certain industry. And it's that clash of mindsets we're having to deal with. And that then creates a challenge of how do we get to the future? One view is we know where we came from, we know how our competitors were trained, we were trained in the same sort of way, went to the same law schools, we know what they're going to do next. if we're house builders, we know roughly what the strategy will be of any other house builder. If they do something in the marketplace, we know why they've done it. We know what they're going to do next. But what we're seeing now is people coming into our sector to say, actually, if we want to make money in your sector, we're not going to do it the way you do. How we're going to succeed in your world is by changing the game itself. So every single telecoms company will tell you that they had the idea for free telephony over the internet first. It was their idea. They'll also tell you that whoever had that idea is no longer with the company, is off spending more time with their family. Because why would you give away your core product for free? It would be like someone coming along to Marks and Spencer's and saying, I'm going to take all this food from your store, I'm not going to pay you for it, but somehow you work out how to make money out of the fact that I've been here. Yeah, it's not a business model that makes sense to any of us. But along came Skype and did exactly that. Gave away the core product of the industry for free, now handles 40% of all international telecommunications traffic with 1,600 staff. BT have more than that in their complaints department. And they make their money on the back of add-on services. And we're seeing this in sector after sector. I mean, look at Riverview, they're a prime example of that. Someone who's come into a sector and actually succeeded by changing the game itself, not just reworking the rules. So we have a choice about how we get there. And what we also know is that the organisations that seem to do the best job at getting to the future actually think about 3 different time horizons. Firstly, they're very clear on what it is they're trying to bring into land in the next 12 months. What's going to be different 12 months from now? Ways of working, practices, systems, or whatever. Secondly, they have a 1 to 3 year horizon in terms of where innovation and growth are going to come from. And they're looking at what's changing in the world around them to say, how might that influence our strategy, either to accelerate it or force us to rethink what we're doing. But they are doing that horizon scanning. And finally, the very best also have an early warning system. They're looking out 4 to 10 years and saying, what's coming over the horizon, what's coming next, and how could that influence us? And I've always been surprised. When I first started working with law firms, I naturally thought that these two were the space that they played in, that their prime advice to their clients was about what's coming next and what could this mean for your business. I was unpleasantly surprised at how little of that I saw going on and how much of what we were advising on was past history. The past or what's going on now. And actually, the law firms themselves were not that well versed in what could be coming next and what could completely upturn a client's industry. And my question was, well, why would you be paid for that? And the answer was, don't be so stupid, leave the room and give us back your check. But we kind of understand. My understanding is that really, if I'm paying professional advisors, I'm paying them to give me a sense of what could happen next, and an exploration of different possible scenarios. I don't want them to give me an answer, but I want them to help me explore and what that could mean for us. And I want them to explore. I'm looking at, as a business, we're in a new field, we're exploring new fields of research, completely new materials, we're looking at getting into legal marijuana, whatever it is we're trying to do. I want my law firm to be able to help me think through what might happen and what might go on and what the implications might be for me. And we do, I'll come back on to legal marijuana because it's a really good test case, actually, of people looking at new industries and the challenges created by the old infrastructure. The really important thing about this is you need different people looking at these horizons, because the people who are really good at looking at the 1 year horizon and putting together and delivering the 1 year plan are almost genetically incapable of doing that 4 year plus blue skies thinking. And what we know is we face, we have some big challenges on the planet. Right now, if we look, then what we're seeing is that we know economically we were in interesting times. We'd come out of the last downturn. But today, the estimate is that global derivatives are worth $3 quadrillion, which is one up from $1 trillion. And the economy itself, the global economy, is 75 trillion. So we've got all these complex ticking time bombs out there. We know the rich economies have a debt of more than 100% of GDP. And we know that more and more scientists and more researchers are coming out and saying, actually, we're working on fields of science and technology, whether it's artificial intelligence, synthetic biology, novel materials, that could pose an existential risk to society. So when the IBM guys get up, don't see them as advisors, see them as an existential risk. But it's really quite interesting. So you've seen people like Elon Musk, the guy behind PayPal, behind Tesla cars. He's off to do asteroid mining. He's just put $50 million up to look at the potential negative impacts of AI. It's a world that's completely unknown right now in terms of where it could go, and we don't know what everyone's doing with it. And what we know is that we don't really know what's going on. There's an Oxford philosopher called Nick Bostrom. He's written a book called Superintelligence, which is all about what happens if we develop artificial intelligence that actually becomes smarter than humans. And one of the things he says is actually, we might already be living in the Matrix. So we might well be Neo, living in the Matrix, not knowing whether it's real or not. We might be living in the digital simulation of a higher intelligence from another planet. As weird as that may seem, we just wouldn't know, because we're living in it, and it's designed to make us believe it's real. Now, whether or not you believe that, it doesn't really matter. What we do know is that we are living in a planet that's more automated, more digitized, and more connected every single day. And we even without AI, we know that there are 3 billion of us connected to this global brain called the internet, which changes the way every single industry operates. It changes the way we relate to information, changes the way we access information. And we are all now being reduced to our data. We are streams of data. If you use Facebook, just ask them to send you the records of your activity for 1 month. You'll get about 1,200 pages of information, even if you're a very light user. The amount of data they capture. We are streams of data, but what we know is in all our organizations, we're pretty bad at using data to add value, to create insight, to define tomorrow. We also know that there are a whole range of these exponentially growing technologies, things that are doubling in power, performance or whatever every year, from artificial intelligence to 3D and 4D printing. You know, we're getting excited by 3D printing. 4D printing will give us objects that change their performance over time, that change their properties. Synthetic biology, creating new materials, robots, drones, you know, all of these areas are going to give us a phenomenal rate of change. They're going to change most of the industries we're in, and they're going to create new industries. And they're going to challenge the law in all sorts of interesting ways, because they're going to create things that we didn't even know existed before. We're going to create experiences that we didn't know about. When we start to augment the human brain and body, you know, what will that mean in terms of the legal implications of giving someone drugs that enhance their performance? We're entering some really interesting white space that we don't yet have precedent or answers for. And we know all of this is driving some design tensions for our organization. So whatever we do inside the organization, what we know is that there are some big choices that we're facing. The first is, you know, on the one hand, we're automating a lot more. Oxford did a study last year. They looked at 700 professions. They looked at the potential for those to be automated, and they reckon that 47% of all the jobs that exist today could simply be automated out of existence in the next 10 to 20 years. Lawyers, accountants, economists, we're all very high on that list as being, you know, their role having the potential to be eliminated. There's a challenge there, though, because if we automate, then the question is, where does the money come from for the people we've automated out of a job to buy the goods and services that the robots and the artificial intelligence are now producing? And there's always the claim that, well, will be new industries coming through. We just don't know what the balance will be. We don't know if the new industries will create more jobs than the old ones take away. And so organizations will actually have to make some quite moral choices about how much do we consciously employ people in order to keep the economy working, or will we contribute more of our taxes to a fund that then gives a guaranteed basic income for people to then buy our goods and services? We're going to get in some really interesting spaces when it comes to being decision makers in organizations. We're also seeing that as we become more automated, as businesses are reduced more and more to rule sets and numbers, it feels very masculine. It can feel like a very masculine world. But on the other side of that, we're seeing more and more, you know, insight in saying actually tapping into the feminine in our organizations is the most powerful thing we can do. Tapping into intuition, connection, community, things that we might consider feminine traits are actually the things that seem to drive performance more than any kind of automation. So people are having a choice now to say, well, how much do we value that? What value do we place on tapping into that side of our business? We just wrote a little article about this in our newsletter last week. We've had more responses to this one topic than anything we've ever written about. Which is kind of interesting. It's clearly tapping into a zeitgeist out there. There's also this thing about, do we follow the crowd or do we follow our curiosity? And I mentioned legal marijuana. Right now in the US, in a number of states, marijuana growing has now become legal. And you're seeing people leaving organizations like Microsoft to go and set up formal businesses to grow marijuana, because the profits are, as you can imagine, not insignificant. The challenge they've got is that the banks won't deal with them, law firms won't deal with them, accountants won't deal with them. So you've actually got this whole subculture now, this whole sub-ecosystem develop out of people leaving those organizations and setting up as lawyers who just deal with the marijuana industry, or accountants who just work with the marijuana industry, who do very well out of it. But the old world just simply cannot bring itself to follow curiosity. It's wanting to stay with the crowd. And the question becomes, when does the crowd stop being the crowd? And when does it no longer make sense to stay in that safe world because it's actually no longer safe to stay there? We also know that if you look at the financial realm, we're seeing thousands of new businesses literally being created that bypass the traditional financial system. Crowdsourcing platforms, new person-to-person platforms, everything from raising equity to invoice financing to loans. Every single aspect of the financial services industry now has been recreated by these new players who are bypassing the old system and charging a lot less rent than the traditional system for doing that. What every business is being faced with the challenge of now is, well, who do I go with? Do I go to my normal bank and pay £30 for an international money transfer, or do I go to TransferWise and pay £1.50? And they're not as well known, but they're going to save me money. And there's this tension starting to build now. And what we're now seeing is the Wall Street banks actually investing in a lot of these businesses because they're seeing that actually these could replace them over time. And what they'd rather do is to invest in the people who are going to eat their lunch than sit back and bitch about it or moan about it. And then the final challenge we've got is there's this kind of, in a lot of markets, we're seeing this kind of winner-takes-all philosophy, or winner takes almost all. You know, who's the number 2 in internet search after Google? You know, who's the number 2 in social media? In a lot of these markets, the number 2 is nowhere to be seen. And it's all to play for. And there's this kind of Star Wars mentality almost of, you know, accumulate as much as possible, control it, a very Star Wars type philosophy that says, you know, you're quite aggressive to anyone else around you, your goal is dominance. Versus the kind of Star Trek philosophy, which was all about the Federation and there being peace and love throughout, abundance. And what's the common feature in the Federation? What's the unique feature of the Federation in Star Trek? And don't pretend you don't watch it. It's cool, you're in the Royal Society, you can admit to watching Star Trek. There's no money. And there's a growing movement coming out of Silicon Valley and a bunch of other places who are saying, look, 3D printing reduces the cost of manufacturing almost to zero for many things. Pink LED farms will give us food in abundance. The internet gives us a free distribution model. We could see the potential to move to a situation where there are very few things that we'd actually charge any serious amounts of money for. You know, and we could get close to this. And you've got economists now doing serious research about how would a Star Trek economy work. And businesses are going to be faced with more and more of a choice about which of these models are we going for. Are we playing in a Star Trek world where we think it's all about winner takes all and trying to accumulate as much as possible? Or are we moving to a model where we can survive in a Star Trek economy where there are very low margins, and actually we can expect the price of our products to go down over time, possibly in an exponential way because of the new science and technology that's coming to us. Underpinning all this, obviously, is a rapid advance in science and technology, and particularly information technology. So we're seeing a few things happen. We're seeing how technology is leveraging people, it's re-engineering processes, it's driving innovation. The new thing, and the thing you're going to hear a lot about today, is the pooling of knowledge in our organizations, using artificial intelligence and collaboration technologies to start to create that hive mind, to start to say, how do we pool that insight across people within and outside the organization to accelerate the way we make decisions and bring new insights to bear, even before humans had a look at the situation. And we know that there are a whole range of these technologies coming. And I think one of the things that I would be asking if I was going back into my organization as a general counsel is asking my CIO or CTO or whoever, what does our view of the technology timeline over the next 10 to 20 years? What do you think are those technologies that could be coming? They're not going to get all of them, but they might be able to find, if they go onto the internet, 60 to 70% of what's reasonably likely to come. And if you have a sense of what's coming, then you can start to think about the impacts of that and the decisions you might need to make and the areas we could get into that could be legally grey for us. And we know that there's a kind of natural evolution from the big data and data mining today to the intelligent internet of tomorrow to 10 years out, we're looking at the potential for optical computers, quantum computers, more, if you like, artificial intelligence that gets closer to human intelligence. We're moving in some very interesting spaces here. And we know there's a natural evolution going on underneath that. We're going from the desktop, which most of us understand and remember, some of us still have them, to the luggable, the portable, the mobile, the smartphone. Our world's been transformed by the smartphone in the last 6 years, well, since 2006-07. What happens in the next 9 years? One thing we know we're moving into is wearable technologies, a whole range of on or near body devices that, whether it's the Apple Watch or health monitoring devices. But if this stuff was being patented in the last 3 years, or 3 to 5 years ago, what's been patented in the last 3? And what's been patented in the last 3 is embedded technologies. There are already millions of people with pacemakers, cochlear implants to improve their hearing, ocular implants to improve their sight. That's already happening. And now there are a whole range of devices being created that will be implanted in the human body, from health monitoring, drug delivery, to the memory for your mobile phone. All of this stuff will seem very natural to the generations coming through. Some of you may see this as great, some may see it as horrific, but we know it's coming. How will organizations deal with this? You're used to getting the email that says, Sally, come in on Monday morning, we're going to give you your new phone. But the idea of Sally, come in on Monday morning, make sure your ears are clean because we're going to upgrade your memory is a kind of wholly different, it's a wholly different story. Where are we going to go on this? Are we going to actually get out of that, providing technology, and simply say, look, here's an approved list of systems, but you go and do this. We're not going to mess with stuff that goes inside your body. We're getting into some really interesting territory around this. And we know we're moving into this world where we're getting the internet of everything. The Singapore courts have already looked at the idea of what if we were to use data from the physical environment in a court case. So I might say, well, look, I wasn't at the scene of the murder. I was back at home watching TV, laying back on my lazy boy, drinking coffee. The only problem is that the sensors in all 3 of those say, no, he wasn't here. We have no record of him being here. The Singapore courts are saying, well, why wouldn't that be just as valid? And actually, why couldn't we use the data from those sensors in the room to convict you without you even getting to court? Because if we've got that much independent evidence that says you were present, and that the knife actually says, yeah, I know who was holding me, then we're in a really interesting space. And we're not talking about Star Trek philosophy here. We're talking about stuff that's possible now, in terms of the embedding of sensors in our environment, that kind of information. The other thing is we're moving into this multi-sensory world. So last year you could buy something called an O-phone on Kickstarter. You can invest in an O-phone. O-phones allow you to transmit up to 356 different scents to someone else with an O-phone. There are also people working on taste and touch stimulation. So within 3 to 5 years, we're looking at the potential for you to be able to book a hotel room by smelling the bath products, feeling the bed linens, and tasting the range of menus, all via some sort of device. We will change a whole range of industries in the way they deliver their proposition because of the multi-sensory internet. I don't know how many organizations are thinking through the legal implications of the changes in that. What if you gave someone, the taste of a meal at a restaurant, when they get there, it doesn't taste anything like that? Is that a basis on which to sue? We're entering some really interesting space where technology is taking us. And we know that AI is becoming more mainstream. In the ILTA report we did, 88% of people thought it was very likely or very likely that we'd start to see AI moving in the decision support role inside our organisation, structuring documents. And you're already seeing it being used, and the others are going to talk much more about this, but automatically generating prototype contracts, automatically fact-checking documents, doing a whole range of things that are possible. And what we know is that AI combined with the internet starts to create some very interesting possibilities. So if you look at this site called eternity.me, you can already become immortal on the internet. You can capture everything about yourself, and then it uses artificial intelligence to answer questions on your behalf. So it can advise your friends and family. You can continue to irritate your kids long after you're dead. And this is no longer fantasy. This is available now. We're entering some really interesting space. What if someone makes a decision based on advice from a parent who's passed away that's sitting on this platform, and the advice turns out to be daft, and you end up with a legal case? Who's responsible? You, your parent, or the people running the platform? Who has legal responsibility in that situation? And is there any precedent for how we would deal with this? Where would we get the insight from? And what we know is, with all of this kind of rapid rate of change of technology, we're moving into a space where we're going to see more and more intelligent agents. Whatever we do, your phone is already becoming one, Google Now is one, where we're having these intelligent assistants that learn about us, provide advice, support us. And potentially we have our digital twin who exists out there in the ether, gathering information on our behalf, supporting us. The interesting thing is what happens when your digital twin starts to argue with you and saying, actually, no, you'll keep making this choice, but it's wrong. The evidence suggests that, each time we do this, it goes wrong. Please look at the data. We're getting into some very interesting space here. And what we're also seeing is people starting to use even the basic kind of predictive tools of AI in some quite clever ways. So there's a group of researchers in the States, I think it was University of Michigan, did an interesting study from, 53 to 2013, looked at a whole bunch of cases. And actually, what they were able to predict in 70% of the cases what the outcome would be in the court case. And 71% of the cases, they could predict what the judge would vote. Just going based on past history and then predicting based on past history. So we're seeing that happen more and more. And those are very basic applications now that shouldn't surprise us because it's out there. What we also know is all this new knowledge is creating a whole bunch of industries and driving change in a bunch of industries. And in the book, we identify 30 sectors that we think are going to be at least 50% of the global economy in 15 years' time. And we've looked at lots of different ways of presenting this information, but sadly a boring table is because you probably have got by now that I don't do boring tables. But we saw 6 clusters of industries that we thought were going to be really interesting in terms of the big spaces. One is obviously the whole IT space. A second is things that are going to be focused on the citizen or things that are creating service for us domestically. So whether that's augmentation of the brain and body. One of our authors, BJ Murphy, has written this most incredible book about a chapter about the idea of there being body shops on the high street. In the same way as you can go to tattoo parlors or nail parlors today, using a range of techniques, we'll be able to go in and get body augmentations in the same way. There are already people who will appear a different height each day because they've got prosthetic limbs and they've had 3D printed legs of different sizes. So depending on the context they're going to be in, there'll be a different height each day. There's another guy called David Santloff who's written a chapter on gene editing technology called CRISPR-Cas9. It's in its early stages, but what it's been proven to be able to do is to change our genes, basically, to edit them. So we could change the color of our eyes, the texture of our skin, the thickness of our hair. So within a few years, we'll have these treatments on the high street that will change the human brain and body. We also know that there's a bunch of things that are going to change the way we manufacture, the way we do construction, a range of industries coming through that are going to be about the new societal infrastructure, whether it's smart cities, whether it's about how we feed ourselves, whether it's the way we govern. These are all going to become trillion-dollar industries. There's certain industries that we can see will have to be transformed. One is professional services, another is infrastructure. You can look at all the different estimates from 30 trillion to 200 trillion in terms of how much infrastructure the planet needs. There's no way we can carry on delivering it in the way we've been delivering it in the past. So it's going to need dramatic transformation, not only in the way we finance it, but in the way we deliver infrastructure. And then the final group are around energy and the environment. All these industries are going to challenge the way we think. They're going to create new science. They're going to challenge precedent. They're going to create new ways of working and new behaviors that will that will demand a complete rethinking of the law or the creation of new law. And one of the things that the people in these sectors are saying is, why can't we write that law in software? Why can't it all be written and executed? So if we break the law, we're just fined instantly. We don't need to go to court. Why is it we need to create legal systems that need interpretation? And again, Singapore is in the lead in this, where it's saying actually our next constitution should be one that's entirely written in software. So it can be executed. So your car could fine you if you speed, and your car could prevent you getting into the car if you haven't paid your parking tickets. We could just do away with a large chunk of the legal system. All of this is then creating what you might call magic and mayhem in the marketplace. And for me, dragons are a great example of this. On the one hand, they're these magical and beautiful creatures, but they also have the potential to create massive mayhem in the environment around them. And let's just, have a look at some of the examples of what's already happening and what could happen. Magic, one of those things that I think a lot of organizations struggle with is as we automate, it's very hard to differentiate our service from anyone else. And so you need to create something that creates a wow factor, that makes your customers talk about you. Lawyers are always concerned about anything that stands out and has a kind of element of uniqueness to it, because then there's legal issues. But this is one I love from Japan. If you play golf in Japan, the biggest risk you face is getting a hole-in-one, because it costs you about $5,000 in gifts for your friends. So these guys have come up with a great solution, which is that if you're having a good day, you're striking the ball sweetly, for $4 you can now insure against getting a hole-in-one on an app on your iPhone. It's taking away pain or creating pleasure, and we're going to be seeing more and more of that as we automate. We're going to have to try and differentiate more and more and create magic, and there'll be a real challenge inside our organisations as to how we do that. We're also seeing organisations moving away from owning stuff and saying, actually, I need to use it, whether it's my car, my computing system. There's really no value anymore in organisations owning assets. There are a limitation now. They hold back flexibility, which is why you're seeing so many people going to the cloud for the computing solutions. They allow you to change quickly. We're seeing dramatic change in the way we innovate, in the way we finance innovation. If you're in the food industry, or food and drink, roughly 1 in 18,000 products is successful. 1 in 18,000 new products is successful. That's not a very good hit rate, and it's a big waste of resources. So now more and more people are saying, actually, let's go to these crowdfunding platforms. We'll put our idea on the platform and we'll let the market tell us whether there's value in this gap. We can see there's a gap in the market, but is there any value in it? This guy wanted to create a wristwatch for an iPod Nano that you could plug it into. He needed to raise $30,000. He actually raised over $900,000 in the window, which gives him a very strong signal that the market likes his product. He's now able to go to investors and say, look, I've crossed all those hurdles you were setting me. Now invest in my business. And we're seeing more and more corporates now starting to put products and services onto these platforms as a way of testing them before they go through expensive product development and business plan development. It's a very quick way of testing new ideas. But the one that I really love is the innovation that's going on around how we charge for goods and services. And actually, law firms have been reasonably innovative in the recent years. You're now seeing in the US in particular pricing groups coming up with new models. But we're seeing, we're used to aggregated buying now. But the one I love is the auction model. It's like a license to print money. This is madbid.com. That if you read Metro in the UK, you'll see adverts and you'll go, how is it they can sell a car for £1,000? Well, how it works is that when you make a bid, the price goes up by a penny, but you pay a bidding fee of £1.50. So on the first one, you're selling a TV for £630 with 25 seconds to go in the auction. The winning bidder's pretty happy because they're paying £20.59. But as a vendor, I'm delirious because I'm getting 2,059 bids at £1.50 each, which means I've made over £3,000. It gets better though with the second one. The laptop is priced at £614. 26 seconds to go in the auction, I've made nearly £9,000. But the one that makes you feel like you can go back to your headmaster and say, look, I proved you wrong, I have made it, is the last one where you're selling money. Here we're selling £125. 4 seconds into the auction, we've made £81. Typically, they'll sell that £125 for between £10 and £50, which means they'll make back between £1,500 and £7,500 on a £125 outlay. That's got to be worth getting out of bed for, isn't it? Now, the question is, what new business models is your organisation considering? What are the legal implications of that? What are we doing around exploring the implications of the models we're going after? In some countries, this is banned. They're saying it's gambling. Others are saying it's a great way of doing it. I was talking to some guys from United Airlines yesterday who were saying we had a 2-year debate internally about whether we sold off unused capacity in our planes through auction just before the flight. And they said, we asked our big corporate clients, what do you think the big corporate clients are going to say? They said, no, don't do that. Not because they would move their business away, but because they'd be pissed off if they paid $5,000 for a seat and someone's getting it for $500. But the reality is no one's going to stop booking a first-class seat because there's a possibility they might get one in auction and otherwise have to spend a 14-hour flight in economy. People aren't getting that you can experiment with these things and you can find clients that are willing to do it. And this is one of the things we found in the US, is the US law firms are really willing now to partner with their clients on experimental business models, experimental ways of charging for goods and services. And we heard quite a lot of examples. Anyone know what's common about all these firms? There's some law firms in there, should make it obvious. They all accept Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a digital currency. There are many different digital currencies out there. That's great. There's about 500 of them, but that's not the interesting bit. The interesting thing about Bitcoin is the underlying technology, which is called blockchain technology, which is a super secure protocol for communicating information. And basically, you have a transaction, it's encoded in something called a hash, but the hash also includes the hash of the previous block in the chain. And it's all public, so everyone can see all these transactions. So if someone tries to alter a transaction, you change the entire chain in the bitchain afterwards, so it's the blockchain. So it's very easy to see something's gone wrong. So people are saying, actually, these public ledgers, they're decentralized. We could change the way all sorts of sectors work. We could basically eliminate central clearing authorities. We could create smart contracts, contracts that can self-execute, that have written into them the rules of what happens when the contract proceeds, and then we know what to do at the end of it. We don't need lawyers involved at all. Then there's other people saying, well, actually, you then need a separate set of law around the blockchain to say what happens if a contract doesn't execute. So you have a whole new set of law. But what we're seeing is more and more people exploring this. So, for example, the UK Health Service is apparently looking at the potential to save 40% of IT costs by using the blockchain to encode all health information that's communicated around the infrastructure. And we're seeing sector after sector where people are saying this could change the game. In the US, NASDAQ OMX, which is one of the exchanges, is experimenting with using blockchain for the transactions on the market for trades in companies that are pre-IPO as an experiment before moving it to the main market. So you'd see stock transactions moving in there. You'd eliminate most disputes because basically the information's there. If you look at this example at the bottom, assets would have their own register. So you take a house would be encoded on the blockchain. So it would know its history, it would know all the searches that have been done. If it was going up for sale, the house would basically order its own searches. And so you wouldn't have to do that. So when you completed the transaction, you'd be completing it with all the information available. We change a whole range of industries through smart contracts. We're starting to see some law firms get their heads around what this could mean and how it could change their practice. The other thing we're starting to see is what you might call the barbarians at the gate. People who don't care about the impact of their behavior on the sectors they're going into. So in the US, Google now does home delivery. You can order stuff from them, home improvement equipment, home electronics, food, but you don't know who you're buying it from. You're buying it from Google. Their staff sit inside Walmart, Home Depot, Target. They buy the goods and services, they get a Google discount, they put it in a Google car, it delivers it to you, but if you have a complaint, you go back to Google. And the question is, why are Google doing this? Well, Google get that my kids have way more loyalty to Google, Apple, and Facebook than they do to Marks and Spencer's, Currys, and Barclays Bank. And they get that actually, if you own that interface, you can become a player in the entire value chain, and you can start to completely disrupt other sectors. And the other sectors really won't have the ability to fight back. And we see a lot of people at the moment who are walking around with giant targets on their chests and just don't get it. And you see the alliances they're forming, and you say, you've just written your own obituary and you don't get it. You're stood on this conference platform hailing the deal you've just done with Amazon, where they're going to take 75% of your profit, or your revenues. You know, how's that going to work for you? And you know, don't bother booking a place at the conference next year because you'll be looking for a new job. But we're seeing this in sector after sector, and it's, you know, how do we spot this? And you're seeing some examples of people behaving, doing interesting stuff. This is a guy called Tim Huang. He created a legal firm called Robot and Huang. And Robot were actually two computers. And basically what he wants to do is to automate the law. He's a computer hacker, he's a computer innovator, an internet innovator, does all sorts of different things. But he basically said what we're doing is coming in and trying to automate the law. Rather than applying the law to automation, what we want to do is to turn the law into basically a software program. And let's see what we can do about this. And he's now running a challenge to see whether to take on the US legal system to say, why can't unlicensed lawyers practice law if they've encoded the law in technology? What's to stop them doing that? Because the only barrier right now is this stuff. But we're seeing more and more of this happen. And then you're also seeing what you might call the aliens in your midst. The people you thought you could trust, who suddenly, when you're in the bar, peel back their skin and reveal that they're from another planet. There's a great example of this in the US, a law firm called Bradford Bartell. They've gone from charging sort of $30,000 for handling employment law cases to charging $300 to use their predictive analytics program to look at past cases to say whether or not you should fight the case. So we're entering some quite interesting territory here. You're also seeing people trying to get faster, to say, how do we speed up the process of what we do? This is a construction firm in China. This is a 30-story building built in 15 days. They prefabricate it all in the factory and put it together on site, because they're basically saying, actually, the speed of the market means that if we wait 3 years to build a hotel, which is what it normally takes, the market could have moved. The interesting thing for them is they can build the buildings faster than the lawyers can write the occupancy contracts. And then what we're also seeing is that's an example of this exponential thinking. People saying, how do we apply that Moore's law thinking to business? So Airbnb, 90 times more bedrooms per employee than the average hotel group. Tangerine Bank, 7 times more customers per employee. The mind-blowing one, though, is Local Motors, who can produce a car 1,000 times cheaper than a new car design, 1,000 times cheaper than their competitors, and create each new car off the line 5 to 22 times faster. Why? The average Ford has 5,000 components. The average 3D printed Strati from Local Motors has 50. Completely changing the game. And we're seeing that exponential thinking, people giving themselves permission to say, how would we do it totally differently? I've yet to see anyone really do that exponential thinking in the legal sector. But it does have a massive impact on valuation. You look at Uber. Uber basically recycles capacity in the marketplace, drivers and cars. Its valuation has gone up 20 times in 3 years. We're now seeing the innovators actually learning from each other. So Amazon are about to launch a service where they're going to use the spare capacity, i.e. you and I, to do their deliveries for them. So people who are willing to pick up a package and take it somewhere and get a pound or two for doing it, they'll use that rather than paying the normal delivery companies to do it. We're going to see more and more of that kind of innovative thinking coming. In business, one of the things we're seeing as well is people saying, actually, this is all getting so complicated that we can't do this anymore. We're going to strip back everything. We're going to become very light. We're going to be a brand and a few bits of IP, and everything else will be outsourced. And we're seeing others saying, actually, we're just going to be adoption agencies. We're going to have corporate venturing arms that are going to go and adopt a bunch of companies and hope that they create the future for us. If you look at Endemol have set up a 30 million euro fund where the remit for the guy running the fund is invest in the companies that will destroy us. And we're seeing this more and more where the corporate venturing arms are being challenged to do this. And then finally, you're seeing what you might call the automation junkies. The people who are saying, actually, let me pursue total automation. If you look at eBay, eBay handles about 15 million legal disputes a year, entirely automated. And there are people now saying that with blockchain technology, we can create platforms. There's one called Ethereum where you can write a company. You can literally write its strategy, all its business rules, everything in software. So the company just exists as a piece of software. And then you could have companies then become technologies, and groups of companies become groups of technologies that you plug together. This starts to give you the idea of things like the self-owning car, that actually everyone who contributes to producing the car just takes revenue from it when the car goes out and rents itself to the marketplace. You start to get some very different behaviours coming out. I'm going to speed up because my time's running up. So you can get the idea that enterprises won't necessarily own themselves. It means we need a whole bunch of new skills to navigate this stuff. Everything I've talked about now, though, is the sort of known universe. You can see it on the horizon. It's just in what's out there. A couple of thoughts on what's coming next. One is one of our authors, Grace Scott, talks about the fact that as everything gets automated and digitized, we could move into this world where it really does become very hard to differentiate between the virtual and the digital, and the two will become so intertwined that we'll be living in this kind of continuous simulation. There'll be people who are quite happy living in the simulation. We've also got to be prepared for the fact that we will have robots, holograms, and artificially intelligent agents all operating in our environment. How are we going to relate to them? How are we going to work with that? And this isn't 10 years away. This is the next 5 we're going to start to see this happening. And we're seeing a lot of research on how we read the brain. And within 5 to 10 years, we'll be in the position to be able to read and write to brain cells and upload your brain to the internet. The interesting thing is that information moves about 1 million times faster in silicon than it does inside our brains. which means you could either use that brain as a backup or you could have it go and do work on your behalf. The problem is how you update in the two, and which one do we trust, the silicon one or whatever. Also, what happens when Google or whoever's managing the brain backup goes, actually, we wiped that bit of space because we really didn't think you needed it anymore. All this stuff creates a really interesting challenge. We can either go, well, technology is taking us this way, let's just do what it tells us, or we start to say, do we need a digital ethics treaty? Because just because you can do this with technology, should we? And how, who makes the choices about what isn't allowed? There are regulations around drugs we bring to market, around foods, but there's nothing around technology. There's no controls over what people are developing, really. So where are we going with this in the legal sector? Just a few thoughts, really. One is some corporate counsel are getting quite smart. So Kia, and you're going to hear more about this from Susan, Kia now do a technology audit of their law firms to say, they look at the technical proficiency of the lawyers serving them to basically say, do you know how to do what you're doing? Because I don't want to pay lots of time, lots of money for you to be inefficient at what you do because you don't know how to use Word or a PDF, which seems reasonable. We're also seeing lots of law firms now starting to do preemptive security clearances to say, actually, let me prove that my systems are up to scratch, because the CIA identified that law firms were one of the biggest risks to the corporations in the US because they were the weakest link in the security chain. So actually, if you wanted to get at the corporate's data, you went to the law firm. So they're getting these huge security audits, but every company is asking them to do the same audit. So a preemptive audit saves them time. Asking your law firms to show you their security audit is an important piece. You're seeing lots of clever uses of AI. Lex Machina, it looks at patents, very interesting piece of application that kind of looks at patent applications. Very simple tool that helps people in IP cases. This is an interesting one called Fast Case, and what this does, it basically, we spend a lot of time summarizing and categorizing information. But what this does instead is uses citation analysis and data visualization to say, what types of cases, when did these cases first emerge? How relevant are they to us? When was the decision made? So which are the cases we actually need to be looking at, and can search very large data sets very quickly. Lots of talk about virtual courts and why do people need to go to court? Why can't we just do it with TV screens and over the internet? But also, why can't we embed the law? Why can't your car fine you? Why is it that so much of the legal system still requires us to go to court? Why can't it be embedded in society and just automated into a rule set? We're also seeing all these new things coming along. Our disruption is forcing challenges to the law. We've changed the law in the UK now in terms of allowing people to let out their bedrooms so they can sell their spare bedroom on Airbnb. We're going to see more and more challenges coming from all these disruptions to the legal system, where the law was not invented when these ideas were. The law was invented before these ideas. Do we need to change the law to take account of the world we're moving into? You're seeing some clever innovations inside law firms. Whiteman's, at the behest of their clients, are now, rather than creating new solutions every time, they're actually going and trying to reuse solutions. So they had a solution for insurance claims to be able to show branch by branch where the claims were. They then had a real estate client say, I want to look at the health of my branches and the performance and legal claims by branch. And they could use exactly the same tool and speed it up for clients. And we need clients to be demanding of that. We're seeing more and more law firms actually trying to create some sort of magic. This is a tool from Latham & Watkins. It was designed for their staff originally, so when they were in a meeting and someone mentioned a term in a finance meeting they didn't know, they could just look it up on the app. The demand from clients was such as they've now built a whole suite of these, which are really popular with their clients because they explain terminology in pretty much every sector. Evershed's quite a clever tool they're using with these big screens of looking at reputation of their clients, looking at mentions of them on the internet, and coming back and analysing what this could mean for the client, whether it's negative, positive, or neutral. Seyfarth Shaw in the US, one of the things they've done is basically for every client matter, they create a process map and a project map, and they use that to talk the client through exactly what's going to happen, and they can tie billing to the map, and it's all visible to the client. And then the client has a say over the design of the process, but basically every project or every case is treated as a project and can be managed as such. What we see is, in this research, everyone was saying that technology is going to be critical here. My question is, to what extent do you assess your law firm's capacity to innovate? But what we do know is, everyone expects IT to become a bigger and bigger part of the way courts work. So my time's up. I think what this really raises is a question for you guys in terms of when you go back to the law firms you work with, what questions are you asking them about how they see the future? What questions are you asking them about the technologies they're investing in, where they see the technology going? And what questions are you asking them about how they're preparing to serve you in an uncertain future? I hope that's made some sense. I hope it's given you some food for thought and set up the conversation of the rest of the day. Thank you.